Today's episode, we're following a Sherpa who watched money do something he had never seen it do before. Not just by a summit attempt, but systematically dismantle every mechanism that existed to prevent an unqualified climber from reaching the death zone. Every checkpoint that should have stopped her had been paid to look the other way. Every guide who raised a concern had been replaced with one who would not. By the time Dorje Wangchu clipped into the rope beside her at the South Col, every institutional safeguard between this woman and the mountain had already been purchased and set aside. All that remained was the mountain itself. And the mountain, as it turned out, did not have a price. Dorje Wangchu had been guiding on Everest for 14 years when the operator called him in February of 2023 with an offer he described as unlike any he had made before. The client was an American, late 50s, no significant climbing experience. She had attempted to book with 4 separate high-altitude operators over the previous 18 months and had been declined by all of them on the basis of her credentials, or more precisely, the absence of them. Her highest documented summit was a guided hike to Machu Picchu at 7,972 feet. She had completed a gym-based fitness program and owned, by all accounts, a substantial collection of high-end mountaineering equipment that had never been used above 10,000 feet. What she also had was money. Significant, specific, strategically deployed money. The operator explained the arrangement. The client, her name was Patricia Holt, though within the guiding community she would come to be referred to simply as the deposit, had paid $450,000 for a bespoke expedition package that included a private permit, a dedicated camp infrastructure installed in advance at all 4 camps, a personal oxygen team, satellite communication systems, a private base camp doctor, and a team of 6 Sherpas. She had also, the operator noted carefully, made supplementary payments to several of the administrative contacts involved in permit processing, ensuring that the standard experience verification requirements were. The operator paused and chose the word streamlined. Dorje asked what streamlined meant. The operator said it meant the paperwork reflected what was necessary for approval. Dorje understood. The paperwork was false. Patricia Holt's permit had been issued on the basis of climbing credentials she did not possess, verified by officials who had been compensated to verify them. She had not bribed her way past a single checkpoint. She had bribed her way past every checkpoint, methodically, expensively, and apparently without any particular difficulty. The fee the operator was offering Dorje was 4 times his standard seasonal rate. He said he needed to meet her first. Patricia Holt arrived at base camp on April 30th in a private helicopter chartered from Kathmandu, standard enough for wealthy clients, but the helicopter was followed 20 minutes later by a second one carrying additional personal supplies and what her assistant described as her wellness infrastructure. A portable hyperbaric chamber, a personal chef, a massage table, and a crate of supplements whose combined retail value, Dorje would later estimate, exceeded what he earned in 2 full guiding seasons. She was 58 years old, trim and fit in the way that expensive personal training produces, and she carried herself with the specific authority of someone who had spent several decades being the most important person in every room she entered. She had made her money in pharmaceutical distribution, a business built on the understanding that access was the product, that the substance itself was secondary to the network that delivered it. She had applied that philosophy to Everest with the same systematic precision she had applied to everything else. She shook Dorje's hand firmly and told him she was aware of his reputation and was pleased to have secured him. He noted the word secured. Not hired. Secured. She gave him a laminated document that her assistant had prepared, a day-by-day expedition schedule, color-coded by activity, with target elevations, scheduled rest windows, and projected summit date circled in red. May 18th, 19 days away. The schedule had been built by someone with a thorough knowledge of Everest's standard commercial itinerary and no understanding of what the body actually required to survive it. Dorje looked at the schedule for a long time. Then he looked at Patricia. He told her the schedule was not achievable, that the acclimatization windows were too short, the rest periods insufficient, and the projected summit date assumed a level of physiological adaptation that could not be purchased or rushed regardless of the budget. He told her the mountain had its own schedule and it did not coordinate with laminated documents. Patricia listened with the patient attention of a chief executive being briefed by a department head whose concerns she had already decided not to act on. She told him she appreciated the perspective and that she had a media commitment on May 20th that made the 18th non-negotiable. Dorje put the schedule down on the supply crate between them. He said, "The mountain does not know about your media commitment." She smiled, said she was sure they would figure it out. Then she turned to speak with her assistant, and Dorje understood precisely what he was dealing with. She had paid for an outcome. She had confused the purchase of support with the purchase of safety. And no number of Sherpas, no private permit, no portable hyperbaric chamber was going to metabolize oxygen into her blood above 26,000 feet any faster than it did for every other human body on the mountain. He took the job. The fee was real, and his youngest son had a medical bill that was also real. He took the job and he opened his logbook and he wrote, "She has purchased everything except what she needs." The acclimatization period was the most expensive farce Dorje had witnessed in 14 years of guiding. Patricia's private camp infrastructure meant she never had to share space, wait for tent assignments, or coordinate with other expeditions. Her personal chef produced hot meals at every camp. Her base camp doctor monitored her vitals with equipment that would not have been out of place in a hospital. Her hyperbaric chamber was used 3 times in the first 2 weeks, each session carefully logged and reported to her as evidence of optimal preparation. What the equipment could not do was change the numbers. Her saturation readings at Camp 1 were low. Not alarmingly, but consistently. The kind of readings that in a standard expedition would trigger a conversation about whether to continue. Dorje had that conversation. Patricia's personal doctor, a man named Fielding, who had been well compensated for his presence and who understood implicitly that his role was supportive rather than restrictive, framed the readings as within an acceptable range given her age and the altitude. Dorje noted in his logbook that Dr. Fielding had not been above 18,000 feet before this expedition. At Camp 2, her crampon technique remained uncertain on the steeper approach pitches. Dorje drilled her on it during rest days. She improved, but the improvement was the improvement of conscious effort rather than ingrained reflex, the kind of technique that holds in calm conditions and fails when fear or exhaustion override conscious control. He noted this. He said nothing to her about it because he had already learned that saying things to Patricia produced acknowledgement without integration. She heard everything and changed nothing. At Camp 3, at 24,500 feet, her saturation after rest was 63%. Dorje sat with her in the tent and told her, for the 3rd time in the expedition, that her body was not adapting adequately and that he was recommending a return to Camp 2 for an additional rest cycle before any summit push. Patricia pulled out the laminated schedule. She pointed at May 18th. She told him that her team had been paid to get her to that summit on that date and that she expected the team to perform accordingly. Dorje looked at the schedule. He looked at his oximeter. He looked at Patricia. He told her that he was part of her team and that he was telling her clearly that the summit date was going to kill her. That 63% saturation at Camp 3 meant she would be at or below 50% in the death zone, which meant her brain would be making decisions without sufficient oxygen to make them correctly, which meant the moment she most needed judgment was the moment she would be least capable of it. He had watched this exact sequence in 3 different ways on this mountain. None of them ended with the client catching their scheduled flight home. Patricia told him she had paid for a summit attempt, not a risk assessment. He said both came with the FEE. She had just been choosing not to receive one. She contacted the operator that evening via satellite phone. By morning, 2 of Dorje's 5 fellow Sherpas had been quietly reassigned and replaced with guides from a different agency. The message was clear and did not require translation. He was replaceable. The summit date was not. The summit push began on May 17th, 1 day ahead of the laminated schedule. Patricia had pushed the departure earlier after a forecast update showed a tightening weather window. The decision was made in consultation with Dr. Fielding and the operator, neither of whom had climbed above Camp 3. Dorje learned of the revised departure time 4 hours before it happened. He climbed beside her because the alternative was leaving her with guides who had been selected for compliance rather than judgment. He had spent 14 years believing that his presence beside a client meant something. He was not ready to test what happened when it did not. Patricia moved through the lower death zone with more determination than Dorje had expected. Her fitness, genuine and expensive, carried her through sections where pure cardiovascular output was the primary requirement. She reached the balcony at 27,600 feet at 4:10 a.m. Her saturation read 59%. Dorje showed her the number. She looked at it and kept climbing. Above the balcony, the ridge exposed them fully to the wind, and Patricia's pace began to degrade in the way Dorje had been watching for since Camp 2. Not a collapse, but an erosion. Each rest stop was slightly longer. Each recovery was slightly less complete. Her responses to his questions came a half-beat slower than they should have, the lag of a brain beginning to cue its functions differently as oxygen became a managed scarcity rather than an assumption. At the south summit, 28,700 feet, he stopped her. He checked her oxygen cylinder. She had consumed 70% of it. Her saturation was 51%. He held the oximeter screen in front of her face for a long time, making sure her eyes focused on the number. Then he told her the descent would kill her. Not the summit. The descent. She had enough oxygen to reach the top. She did not have enough to come back down. Patricia looked at the oximeter. She looked at the summit, close enough that other climbers were visible on the final ridge. She reached into her suit pocket and produced a folded sheet of paper that Dorje had not seen before. She unfolded it and held it out to him. It was a personal check made out to him for $50,000. She told him it was his if he got her to the summit. Dorje stood at 28,700 feet with a check for $50,000 in his gloved hand and a woman in front of him whose brain was running on 51% of the oxygen it needed and who had just offered him money to help her die more expensively. He folded the check and put it in his own pocket. He told her he was keeping it as payment for what he was about to do, which was get her down this mountain alive, whether she cooperated or not. He clipped her short rope to his harness before she could respond. He turned downhill, and he started moving. Patricia fought him for the first 200 vertical feet. Not physically, she did not have the capacity for that, but verbally, in the fragmented, repetitive way that hypoxic cognition produces. She told him she would have him arrested. She told him she would have his guiding license revoked. She told him she had paid for a summit, and she was going to get a summit. The words came in loops, the same threats cycling back every few minutes as her working memory failed to retain that she had already made them. Dorje did not respond. He kept moving. By the time they reached the balcony, the verbal resistance had stopped. Patricia was moving mechanically, her full concentration required for the placement of each foot. Her oxygen saturation at the balcony read 47%. Dorje transferred his personal spare cylinder and increased her flow rate to maximum. It was not enough to reverse what was happening. It was enough, he calculated, to keep her moving. She lost consciousness at 27,100 feet between the balcony and the south core. Not suddenly. The way altitude takes consciousness is rarely sudden. It was a slow dimming, a progressive reduction in response and coordination that Dorje had been tracking for 2 hours, until the moment her legs stopped generating output and her weight came onto the short rope entirely. He arrested the load, radioed the South Col for support, and held her on the slope for 22 minutes until 2 Sherpas from a neighboring expedition reached them and helped rig a lowering system. They reached the South Col at 2:40 in the afternoon. Dr. Fielding administered treatment. The evacuation to Camp 2 began at first light the following morning. Patricia Holt did not survive. She died at Camp 2 at 21,300 feet at 7:15 in the morning on May 19, 2023, from complications of high-altitude cerebral edema. She was 58 years old. She had spent $450,000 to reach a mountain that charged a different currency entirely, and she had arrived without sufficient funds in the only denomination that mattered. Her estate settled all outstanding guide and operator fees in full within 30 days of her death, per the contractual terms she had signed. The total disbursement, including Dorje's bonus, exceeded $600,000. The mountain received nothing. It never does. It does not need to. It has an inventory of exactly one thing to offer, and it extends the same terms to everyone who comes for it. Dorje Wangchu guided 2 more seasons before retiring to Namche Bazaar, where he runs a small school for young Sherpas interested in guiding careers. The first thing he teaches them, before technique and before equipment and before route knowledge, is a single principle he has spent 14 seasons watching people pay to ignore. The mountain, he tells them, has never accepted a bribe. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more, click on your screen now.